Thank you for joining us on our channel. Who exactly were the Canaanites, the people so often feared and referenced in the Bible? And why did God order their complete destruction by the Israelites, one of the most intense and debated commands in the Scriptures? In this video, we'll explore a narrative full of hidden truths, intense battles, and deep spiritual lessons. Prepare to uncover the true reason behind the downfall of a people who lived for centuries in a land filled with divine purpose and marked by grave offenses. The region of Canaan, long promised to Abraham and his descendants, wasn't an empty space waiting to be filled. When the Israelites arrived, they encountered strong, long-established groups living there. These included mighty cities, fortified with strong defenses, inhabited by seasoned fighters, some even described as giants. From the viewpoint of both the Israelites and God, these societies were spiritually corrupt beyond redemption. So why were the Canaanites considered such a severe threat that their complete destruction was ordered? To grasp the answer, we must dig deeper and examine the historical and spiritual background of this story. Canaan wasn't just a territory rich in crops and natural beauty. It was a place chosen by God to reveal His promise, His loyalty, and His justice. This land was where God planned to fulfill the covenant He had made with Abraham. That same Abraham, generations earlier, had received a divine promise that his children would inherit this land. But the promise involved more than simply owning land. It included divine favor, success, and most importantly, a sacred agreement with God Himself. Canaan was located in a key area of the ancient Middle East, serving as a link between major civilizations of the time. It extended from modern-day Lebanon in the north to the Negev desert in the south, and from the Mediterranean coast to the Jordan River. In today's map, this region includes parts of Israel, Palestine, Lebanon, and also some areas of Syria and Jordan. The land was known for its fertility. Crops flourished, water flowed through its valleys, and it was famously called a land flowing with milk and honey, meaning it was abundant in resources and life. However, this rich and beautiful land posed a massive challenge: to take control of a region already occupied by strong and spiritually corrupted nations. The Canaanites weren't a single nation under one ruler, but rather a group of different peoples connected by shared traditions and beliefs. They lived in separate city-states like Jericho, Hazor, Sidon, and Tyre, each led by its own king and political system. These urban centers were often surrounded by massive defensive walls, making them nearly impossible for an average army to conquer. But the Israelites weren't just any army, and their mission was not a typical military campaign. The Bible tells us the Canaanites were descendants of Ham, one of Noah's sons, through Ham's son Canaan, whose name eventually came to represent the land they inhabited. According to Scripture, after Ham committed a serious act of dishonor, Noah cursed his grandson Canaan. This curse would echo through the generations, revealing itself not just in the moral downfall of the Canaanite people, but also in the harsh judgment that was to come upon them many years later. The Canaanite way of life was deeply tied to pagan religions that went directly against God's principles. Their religious system included a large number of deities, with some of the most important being El, Asherah, and especially Baal, the god linked to fertility, weather, and crop production. But worshipping these gods was far more than just offering gifts or saying prayers. It involved acts like ritual prostitution, where sexual acts were performed in temples to honor the gods, along with widespread immorality, incest, and the most horrific of all, sacrificing children. That's right. Archaeological digs and historical texts show that it was normal among the Canaanites to offer babies and young children as burnt offerings to gods like Moloch. The stones of their altars were soaked in the blood of innocents, all in the hope of receiving blessings of fertility from their gods. To God, These actions weren't just wrong, they were the result of a corruption so severe that there was no possibility of turning back or healing. So when God gave the order to eliminate them, it wasn't a random act of violence, but a sentence of judgment on a culture that had gone far beyond any moral boundary. But the Canaanites were not only spiritually lost, they were also strong in battle. Their military power was widely known and feared. Their cities were protected by complex defense systems, and their armies included massive warriors, descendants of Anak, whose size and strength were terrifying. The scouts Moses sent to explore the land even described themselves as tiny insects compared to these men. So for the people of Israel, the Canaanites posed not only a physical danger, but also a serious spiritual threat. Letting that society survive meant putting future generations at risk of adopting their corrupt ways and turning from God. Taking over the land of Canaan wasn't just about winning battles or claiming territory. It was a spiritual struggle on a massive scale. It was the purity of the God of Israel clashing with the deep-rooted wickedness of a culture fully given over to idols and immoral living. The religion practiced by the Canaanites wasn't just different, it reflected a belief system that was morally broken and spiritually harmful. Their gods didn't just shape religious ceremonies, they dictated how people behaved in every part of life. El, considered the highest god, was portrayed in ancient Ugaritic writings as cruel, drunken, and driven by lust. His partner, known as Asherah or Astarte, was the goddess of fertility. She was linked with motherhood and nature, but also with sensuality and temple prostitution. These gods weren't just symbolic, they gave people a reason to behave in ways that would be seen today as shocking, even by open-minded standards. Yet the god most honored and feared by the Canaanites was Baal. As the supposed ruler of storms and rain, Baal played a key role in farming life. Since the people relied heavily on growing crops, their need for rain made them entirely dependent on pleasing this god. The Canaanites believed their agricultural success depended on honoring Baal, which led them to carry out religious rituals that were deeply offensive to both the Israelites and to God. These ceremonies often included sexual acts performed inside the temples themselves, where men and women engaged in acts of ritual intimacy with temple prostitutes. These acts were seen as sacred by the Canaanites, but were viewed by others as acts of extreme moral decay. Their religious events also involved incest and dramatic performances of their gods' myths, filled with violence and actions that showed no sense of ethical boundaries. This belief system didn't just tolerate sexual freedom, it encouraged and glorified it as a way to reach the divine. Yet perhaps the darkest part of Canaanite worship was the sacrifice of children. To honor deities like Moloch, associated with fire and destruction, or even Baal, parents would bring their young sons and daughters to altars and offer them as burnt offerings. These innocent children were killed in hopes of gaining favor from the gods, whether for protection, wealth, or blessings. Even more disturbing, these were not hidden or secret acts. They were a recognized part of public life and formal worship. These sacrifices were carried out openly in religious ceremonies, accepted by the community, and even celebrated by many. So when God commanded the Israelites to tear down every altar, idol, and sacred place of the Canaanites, the issue wasn't about gaining more territory or political dominance. It was a direct strike in a larger spiritual conflict. It was about breaking a religious system that led people far from truth and caused pain, destruction, and death. God understood that if this kind of idolatry remained in any form, it would eventually infect the hearts of the Israelites and pull them away from their mission and identity. As harsh as the order to eliminate the Canaanites might seem, it must be understood in the setting of that historical and spiritual moment. It wasn't a random or ruthless decision. It was the result of years of patience, warnings, and calls to change. God doesn't bring judgment without purpose. In fact, the book of Genesis, chapter 15, verse 16, records God's words to Abraham, saying that his descendants would take possession of the land only in the fourth generation, because the sin of the Amorites had not yet reached its full measure. This tells us something significant. God's justice always comes after mercy, and he allows time for change. His patience gives people a chance to turn away from evil, but that patience has limits. For hundreds of years, God allowed the Canaanites to continue on their path. He gave them time to turn from their ways, holding back his judgment in case they might change. But instead of improving, they grew worse, embracing practices that directly challenged the will of the Creator. The judgment that eventually came was not blind punishment, but justice carried out on a people who, fully aware of their wickedness, refused to change. It also served as protection. Had the Israelites adopted Canaanite customs, it could have destroyed God's redemptive plan for humanity, which he had chosen to carry out through them. So the battle against the Canaanites wasn't just about taking land, it was a clash between good and evil, purity and corruption, the true Creator and the false deities that led people into bondage and destruction. The Israelites didn't simply move into a new location. Their arrival represented the arrival of divine judgment in a place desperately in need of cleansing. God's primary concern wasn't with Canaan's military strength or the size of its fortresses. The deeper danger was the morally decayed culture rooted in the land. If the Israelites, who had just been liberated from years of slavery in Egypt, allowed themselves to be shaped by those customs, they would soon drift away from their loyalty to God. Sadly, that is exactly what happened in later years. When the people of Israel failed to fully carry out God's instruction and left some of the Canaanites in the land, the spiritual damage was severe. Pagan worship crept into their lives, undermining their belief system, their ethical standards, and their loyalty to God's covenant. That's why the order to destroy wasn't based on cruelty, prejudice, or a thirst for power. It came from a deep commitment to preserve holiness, carry out justice, and protect the bigger purpose, the plan of salvation that God had designed through Israel. He wasn't just giving them territory, he was building a nation that would be different, a people chosen to shine in a world covered in moral darkness. To make that vision possible, anything that could shake their devotion or poison their faith had to be removed. Taking over Canaan was one of the most crucial and difficult chapters in Israel's journey. After hundreds of years in Egyptian bondage, they were freed by signs and wonders, then led into the wilderness under the leadership of Moses. What could have taken only weeks turned into a long and demanding journey, filled with moments of doubt, correction, and valuable spiritual growth. During this time, God not only guided them with visible signs, like the cloud by day and fire by night, but also miraculously provided food and water in the desert. At the same time, he was forming a new identity for a group of people who had never experienced life as a free and God-honoring nation. When they finally neared the borders of the Promised Land, the land God had spoken of to Abraham, he gave them a key instruction: send out scouts to assess the land. 12 men, one from each tribe, were chosen to explore Canaan. Their task was to observe everything: the people, the land's condition, the strength of the cities, and what resources were available, so Israel could prepare for the mission ahead. It was meant to be both a practical step and a chance to boost their confidence in God's promise. But the outcome shocked the entire camp. 10 out of the 12 spies returned gripped by fear. They spoke of cities protected by huge walls, armies that looked unbeatable, and giants, the descendants of Anak, who seemed terrifying in both size and strength. Their report created a wave of fear among the people. They said, "We felt like grasshoppers compared to them." This wasn't just about how small they looked physically. It revealed how insignificant they believed they were when facing such enemies. That negative and fearful view quickly spread through the camp, sparking widespread panic, uncertainty, and complaints. The confidence that had carried them this far was suddenly replaced by fear that left them frozen. Among all the people, only two stood firm, Joshua and Caleb. They had seen the same giants, the same towering walls, and the same armies, but their reaction was different. They looked at everything through eyes of faith. They believed that if God had promised the land, then no wall or warrior could stand in the way of his word. With courage and clarity, they told the people, "If God is with us, he will give us the land. Don't be afraid of them." But their message was drowned out by the fearful cries of the crowd. The Israelites, paralyzed by disbelief, focused only on the dangers ahead and forgot the God who had split the sea for them not long before. That choice, to trust fear instead of God, brought serious consequences. That generation, marked by rebellion and doubt, would not be allowed to enter the promised land. They were sentenced to wander in the wilderness for 40 years, 1 year for each of the 40 days the scouts had explored Canaan. During that long period, the adults of that generation, except Joshua and Caleb, died in the desert. Only their children, the new generation raised outside Egypt, without the mindset of slaves, would one day step into the land God had promised. That delay wasn't just punishment, it was also a time of shaping and refining. God didn't want just a strong nation with weapons. He was building a people ready to live in deep relationship with him. This entire chapter proves that the conquest of Canaan was much more than just winning battles. It was, most importantly, a spiritual journey. God was training his people to rely on him completely, even when the odds seemed overwhelming. Victory wasn't only about defeating other nations. It was about standing firm in faith, resisting fear, and choosing obedience over retreat. The real fight wasn't just on the battlefield, it was within their hearts. Faith, loyalty, and purity were the tools they needed most. At that moment in time, those qualities were still being developed within them. That's why God delayed the conquest. In his perfect wisdom, he showed that his promises come with a process. It's not just about getting to the destination, it's about becoming the kind of people who are ready to receive it. God uses the journey to teach trust, build character, and grow unwavering belief. When Moses' time as leader came to an end, the task of guiding the people into the land fell to Joshua. He had proven his faith and courage, and God chose him to carry on the mission. As he stepped into this enormous role, Joshua received a direct and powerful word from God. "Be strong and brave, for you will lead these people into the land I promised their ancestors." With those words began one of the most powerful and unforgettable campaigns in the entire Bible. This journey was not just a military campaign. It was filled with divine miracles and deep spiritual teachings. The first major challenge came at the Jordan River, which was overflowing due to seasonal floods. From a human point of view, crossing was completely out of the question. But the same God who had parted the Red Sea years earlier did it again. The waters of the Jordan stopped flowing and rose up like a wall, allowing the people to walk across dry ground. Once again, they saw God make a way where none existed, and soon after, they faced one of the most well-known moments in the entire conquest, the fall of Jericho. This city was the very image of Canaanite strength, with thick walls and fortified defenses. Yet God did not instruct them to build weapons or siege machines. Instead, he called for silence, walking, and a shout. For 6 days, the Israelites marched once around the city without saying a word. On the 7th day, after circling it 7 times, they lifted their voices in a mighty shout, and the walls collapsed. Not because of human power, but because of obedience and God's direct intervention. It was a powerful message to all the nations around them. The Lord Almighty was with Israel. The campaign continued. Under Joshua's leadership, guided by wisdom and constant reliance on God, the Israelites went on to conquer cities like Ai, Gibeon, Hazor, and more. Each victory brought with it more than just land. It delivered spiritual lessons about dependence, humility, and discernment. At times, disobedience brought temporary setbacks, like the defeat at Ai because of Achan's hidden sin. But once the issue was addressed, God's favor returned, and so did success. Joshua didn't lead like a typical general. His strength came not from clever war strategies, but from a heart that sought God's direction. He knew the outcome of each battle depended on remaining faithful to the covenant. When the conquests were complete, Joshua divided the land among the 12 tribes of Israel, fulfilling a divine promise made long ago to Abraham. That marked the close of one chapter and the beginning of another, a new season where the people were called not just to possess the land, but to live faithfully within it. It was the realization of a promise passed through generations, and a reminder that the greater challenge was not winning battles, but staying obedient. Joshua's life reminds us that true power isn't in armies or numbers. It's in a life surrendered to God. The conquest of Canaan is more than a record of wars and boundaries. It's a spiritual example of how God works through those who put their trust in Him. Canaan, for us today, is not just a location on a map. It represents the abundant, victorious life God desires for every believer. A life filled with purpose, freedom, intimacy with Him, and lasting peace. Just like Israel faced enemies, we too face challenges, battles against sin, personal struggles, and the pressures of a world trying to lead us away from truth. The same call God gave to Joshua still speaks to us now. Be strong and courageous. It's a reminder to keep trusting, even when the odds seem stacked against us, when challenges rise like giants or obstacles seem impossible to overcome. God shows us that real victory doesn't come from our strength, but from faith placed in Him. And as with the destruction of idols in Canaan, we are reminded to remove from our lives anything that stands between us and God. The battle for the Promised Land may be ancient history, but its lessons are as alive and urgent today as ever. Idols aren't just statues made of stone or wood. They can be habits, thoughts, desires, or outside influences that take the place of God in our hearts. To step into the full life that God has planned for us, we must have hearts that are clean, fully surrendered, and ready to obey, even when obedience requires letting go of something we value. Just as Joshua once distributed the land among the tribes of Israel, Jesus now offers a spiritual inheritance to everyone who believes in Him. It's an inheritance not measured in land or possessions, but in inner peace, lasting joy, a close relationship with God, and the incredible hope of eternal life. The victory over the Canaanites was a shadow of something greater, the victory Jesus has won for us. He overcame the world, defeated sin, and now leads us toward the ultimate promised land, eternity in the presence of God. Though this story comes from ancient times, its lessons are still fresh and deeply meaningful. It calls us to live boldly, patiently, and fully reliant on God, knowing that He is the one who brings victory, even during life's darkest moments. The conquest of Canaan pulls back the curtain on who God is, His holiness, His justice, and His unshakable loyalty to His promises. It teaches us that even when His judgments seem harsh, they are rooted in a passionate love for a people called to live in truth and faithfulness. Today we may not face battles with swords and shields, but we do face spiritual enemies just as real. We battle temptations that try to lure us away from God. We deal with distractions that drain our attention and blur our focus. We're surrounded by pressure from a world that wants to mold us into its image. The question is, are you ready to stand firm, to face life's trials with courage and belief? Remember, the same God who led Joshua and the Israelites to triumph is still at work. He hasn't changed. He is near, active, and fiercely committed to those who belong to him. He wants to guide you to your own Canaan, a place of rest for your soul, a life filled with meaning, deep connection with him, and victory over whatever stands in your way. Let this message build your faith, renew your sense of hope, and encourage you to stay strong on your path. Thank you for being with us until the end. If this story touched your heart, feel free to give it a like, share it with someone who might need it, and subscribe so you won't miss what's coming next. May God bless you, and until next time, take care and stay strong.